We want to start with something that happened not long after we went off the air on Thursday. It was a social media post from Josh Gordon, who said, "I take my mental health very seriously at this point to ensure I remain able to perform at the highest level. I've recently felt like I could have a better grasp on things mentally. With that said, I will be stepping away from the football field for a bit to focus on my mental health." That echoed a statement that he issued back in July when he didn't join the Browns, who were his team at the time, at the start of training camp. Now, what happened yesterday, not long after that statement was issued, NFL media reported that Josh Gordon is facing another indefinite suspension for violation of the substance abuse policy. And by the middle of the afternoon, the NFL had confirmed that indeed Josh Gordon is indefinitely suspended. And I admire him for being open about mental health issues, but the reality is when he was saying he's stepping away for a little bit, the reality is Josh Gordon knew he was stepping away for a lot longer, and maybe for good. Even though you can have an unlimited number of indefinite suspensions where you're gone for at least a year and then you go through the reinstatement process and come back, there is a point where you're just not going to try to come back. There is a point where if you come back, you're going to be 30, 32, 34. And for Gordon, he's getting closer and closer to 30. He was a second-round pick in the supplemental draft back in 2012. He has not played a whole lot of football. When he has played very well. He missed 2 full seasons, 2015 and 2016, before he came back for the end of 2017. He was with the Browns. Everything was fine until that moment right before training camp. The league ultimately cleared him to return a few weeks in. And now Josh Gordon out. Joining Martavis Bryant, another guy who'd had a prior suspension of more than 1 calendar year. He was suspended indefinitely recently by the league. And the problem with this is, because it's all also protected by the confidentiality provision in the substance abuse policy, we really don't know what it is that causes this suspension. And I've had a sense this year that maybe the NFL is working with these players more than it has in the past, because the way the policy is written, if you have an indefinite suspension and if you're reinstated, one false move and you get another indefinite suspension with a minimum of a year. One violation, that's it. And I think that the league has been a bit more lenient. Now, because there's no transparency here, we don't know how lenient, and we don't know whether they're being more lenient with some than they are with others. I've had at least one person point out to me, hey, Randy Gregory, the Cowboys defensive end, he's had issues since he's been reinstated. Why isn't he indefinitely suspended? And does it become a competitive advantage issue where the NFL is maybe a little more lenient with one than they are with the other? It's a fair question because we have no way of knowing what it is that gets the NFL to say enough's enough, you're back on indefinite suspension, you can apply for reinstatement in 1 calendar year. But for now, Gordon, we know, suspended. And by the time that it's finalized, that means either waived his appeal rights or he filed an appeal and the appeal was processed and the appeal was unsuccessful. Either way, once it's official, that means it's done, no further recourse, and we will next see Josh Gordon at the earliest as the 2019 regular season comes to a conclusion. But, you know, the other reality here is the way the substance abuse policy is written, it kind of suggests that the commissioner has 60 days after the application for reinstatement to issue a ruling. But when you look at it carefully, and I've had the league confirm this for me, this came up a couple of years ago with Alden Smith, there really isn't a deadline for making a decision. So who knows? If and when Josh Gordon will apply for reinstatement, who knows if and when he'll get reinstatement. You can actually apply 60 days before that 1 year is up. So in theory, you get a decision right at the time the year expires and you can come back. So in theory, could he rejoin the Patriots next year for the last couple of weeks of the regular season? In theory, yes. As a practical matter, it may not happen. I would not feel confident predicting with any degree of certainty that Josh Gordon will be back either late next year or any time after everything he's been through. And we support him. We feel badly for him. And I think that the policy itself that's at the core of these issues, the policy which polices what players do on their own time, and it's not performance-enhancing drug policy. This is substance abuse policy. This is recreational drugs. And some of these are legal, some of them aren't, depending upon where you are. But these are things that are done typically privacy of your own home, typically away from the facility. I mean, it's one thing if a guy's smoking a joint in the locker room. Okay, I could see why a team would have a problem with that, especially in a state where it's still not legal to do that. But for things that happen in the off season, during those months where you're not even at work at all, there's a question of how far any employer should go when it comes to reaching into the private lives of their employees. And I think the NFL is realizing that they're not helping themselves by taking talented players and saying you're not allowed to play for something completely unrelated to anything you ever did at work. Why do you want to deprive yourself of talented players like Josh Gordon, Martavis Bryant, Justin Blackmon? How good could he have been as an NFL player if he hadn't washed out altogether because he couldn't comply with a policy that dictates what people do in their private lives? So I think the NFL would like to get out of the marijuana and substance abuse policy business. And I think when the next CBA is negotiated, that's going to get thrown into the stew of issues where there are, different requests and concessions, and you ultimately have a new CBA. I think the NFL is going to find a way to back off of the marijuana policy and the substance abuse policy. Not completely, but I think what they'll do is they'll soften it to the point where there's something on the books that, as a practical matter, is never enforced with draconian measures like a suspension for a full year. Tom Curran of NBC Sports Boston is going to join us coming up in about an hour. And Curran's attitude about this from the Patriots' perspective seems to be very pragmatic, that the Patriots brought Josh Gordon in knowing full well that this was potentially a limited engagement. They gave up a 5th-round pick. We'll get a 7th-round pick back because they didn't have a 6th-round pick to trade for 2019. So they knew what they were giving up. They knew what they were getting, and I think that they expected that anything beyond that would just be a bonus. And just anything he does positively is a bonus because the Patriots at the time did not have a receiving core they felt good about. And there was one point during the trade negotiations where the Patriots weren't going to get a 7th-round pick back if Josh Gordon was active for 10 games. And ultimately, the Patriots got the 7th-round pick back with no condition. But that 10 games, that kind of gives you an idea of what the Patriots were kind of hoping to get out of the guy. Hey, if we get at least 10 games out of this guy, then it was worth it. And they got 11 games out of him. The problem is, as they work toward the postseason, the guy who's been their most productive receiver from a yardage standpoint with 720, he's gone. And now they have to pivot and focus and hope that others can step up. And we'll see if they can beginning this Sunday against the Buffalo Bills. Stats, you got a question?
Strictly from a football standpoint, Mike, wouldn't the Patriots have been better off if they had just paid Brandon Cooks?
Well, they didn't want to pay Brandon Cooks. They don't like to pay players that kind of big money value. And they got a 1st-round pick in exchange. And look, that was just all so bizarre that Brandon Cooks, 1st-round pick of the Saints, and after a few years, Saints get a 1st-round pick to trade him to the Patriots. After 1 year, Patriots get a 1st-round pick to trade him to the Rams. And look, Brandon Cooks is not tearing it up with the Rams, is he? I mean, if we list the top 5 receivers right now, Brandon Cooks isn't going to be on it. So I don't know.
But he's better than anybody New England has.
Well, that's not a bad point. That's not a bad point. But, they think that their system makes it go, and what they try to do in New England. And I know that every once in a while they'll make a splash on the open market and sign a Stephon Gilmore to a big contract. But what they typically do is they try to pay less because they want to have depth that isn't undrafted rookie or 5th-rounder who's been bouncing around the league. They want to be able to have veteran backups that they pay good money to. They want to have a solid middle class of players so that when the injuries happen, the guys who are stepping in are good enough where they're almost as good as the guys who were injured. And if you start paying Brandon Cooks market value and look at the contract Brandon Cooks got from the Rams, that the Patriots were never going to do that. And it's not the way the Patriots do things. But, yeah, now they're stuck with Julian Edelman, Chris Hogan, Philip Dorsett, Cordero Patterson, and Matthew Slater, who last caught a pass in 2011. That's your 5-deep receiver. And I want to go back to Sunday, 4th and 15, the last play from scrimmage, when the Patriots were trying to force a tie against the Steelers. Josh Gordon wasn't on the field. And offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels explained earlier this week, well, he'd been in on prior plays and he was tired, and we put Cordero Patterson out there instead, and there was no ulterior motive. I'm starting to think there was an ulterior motive. I'm starting to think the Patriots, the team always knows that this is coming, because what happens is the league informs the player and the team that the suspension has been initially decided, and then the appeal process unfolds. So there is a period of time where the team is aware. I think the team knew it was coming, and the team was beginning the process of detaching from Josh Gordon. Because I look at it this way, yeah, they would have loved to have beaten the Steelers, But if Josh Gordon has 150 receiving yards on Sunday against the Steelers and now all of a sudden he's gone, that has a different impact on the psyche of the team. So you put Cordell Patterson out there instead of Josh Gordon because you know what? Cordell, it's going to be you starting next week against Buffalo. It's going to be you week 17. It's going to be you in the playoffs because we know Josh Gordon's not going to be here. And at a time when I was believing that the Patriots really could pull it together because of the extensive playoff experience they have, to not have Josh Gordon just puts more pressure on Tom Brady. And these opponents in the postseason, they're going to smell the blood in the water. They are going to come after Brady. If there's a belief that Brady is shying away from contact, there's going to be more contact. If he's getting rid of the football faster than he used to because he doesn't want to take that hit, if his internal clock has sped up, and even if he's not being pursued by a lineman, he throws the ball sooner than he would have because he's used to having less time, that's the kind of thing that can make it even harder for the Patriots to advance. Cooks, by the way, 72 catches, 1,107 yards, 3 touchdowns. That's good. That's very good. I don't know that he'd have those numbers in New England. And ultimately, bottom line, and look at the criticism of the Rams stats. And this came up during the broadcast on Sunday night. Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth pointed it out. They have backups who aren't getting it done because the Rams have spent on big name player, big name player, big name player. It keeps you from having a second string that has guys who can come in and play, and you're confident they can play. The Patriots have that second string because they didn't pay a Brandon Cooks, but they may be regretting that now. I won't disagree with that.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.